April 7th, 2021. It's late Wednesday night in Newport News, Virginia, a hard-working port city just across the James River from Norfolk, home to the U.S. Navy's Atlantic Fleet.
Newport News is pretty much a military town because you got one of the biggest naval bases on the East Coast right here. You also got a couple surrounding Army bases as well.
You have a lot of active and retired military in and around Newport News.
And at 2 o'clock that April morning, the wife of one former serviceman makes a frantic call to 911.
911, what is your emergency?
Something's happened to my husband.
Okay, calm down. What is your name?
The caller is 36-year-old Danielle Shabazz.
Danielle told the operator that she and her children were away from the house that night.
But she'd called her husband, 39-year-old Sal Shabazz, to say goodnight.
Hey, baby, how's it going?
Hey.
Danielle and her husband were on the phone talking, and all of a sudden, she hears a knock at the door.
Hold on, somebody's at the door.
Who?
He went to see who it was.
So, can I help you?
She hears her husband talking to whoever is at the door.
What are you talking about, man?
The next thing she hears are a series of bangs.
I don't even worry about it.
Sal. I don't know. I think it was gunshots.
Then the phone goes silent.
He won't answer me.
Your mind would just run the gamut of possibilities. Your mind just starts spinning.
She was completely terrified that something had happened to him.
Please send somebody to the house.
Sal Shabazz grew up in South Bend, Indiana, as one of 12 siblings.
His mother had 6 children, and then she adopted 6 more.
I couldn't do it without God. He called me to be the mother of these children, and he equipped me to do so, to parent them.
The fact that half his siblings were adopted wasn't all that set Sal's family apart.
He grew up with his mom being Christian, his father being of the Islam faith.
His full name is Saladin Ibn Shabazz. Saladin is an Arab name.
He was named from a historical sultan from Egypt and Syria who fought the Crusaders in the Holy Land.
From an early age, Sal lived up to his heroic name.
He was a star athlete when he was in high school.
He played varsity football from the day he walked into high school all the way through. He's broke all kind of records that have yet today to be broken.
He was very popular.
Sal Shabazz is that all-American kind of dude.
After finishing high school, Sal continued his success in college.
Sal played football for Grand Valley State and then transferred to Minnesota State.
However, he didn't graduate. Instead, his life careened in a different direction.
While he was in college, Sal's on-again, off-again, long-term girlfriend, Danielle Holland, got pregnant.
Sal and Danielle had known one another since they were kids.
With the impending birth of their daughter, Sal and Danielle decided to make their relationship official.
They got married in 2007. They got married at the courthouse on New Year's Eve. It was like a quick wedding.
And Sal chose a different path for his life to support his family.
Sal enlisted in the Army.
He came to me one day and said, "Mom, I want a way to provide for my family, so I'm going to go to the service."
Although it wasn't without risks.
Sal was immediately deployed to the Middle East to do a full tour in Afghanistan.
And the disruptions didn't end once Sal came home from overseas.
Once Sal returned from his deployment, he was stationed in Newport News, Virginia. So Danielle packed up with her husband and they moved 800 miles away from Indiana to the Chesapeake Bay.
Together, they built a new life in Virginia.
Sal and Danielle had 4 daughters.
Danielle was working at the post office as a mail carrier, and once Sal got discharged from the military, he got a job as a forklift operator.
A decade after Sal first shipped off to Afghanistan, he and Danielle had beaten the odds.
A lot of military couples don't last after the spouse is away for such a long time.
Sal and Danielle were the exception.
It was almost like they were meant for each other.
He's a good husband. Awesome dad. He always was a provider.
They had a bright future ahead of them.
Only now, Danielle fears something terrible has happened to her husband.
Sal's wife has called Newport News police after hearing what she believes to be gunshots.
They had been talking on the phone when she heard the bangs.
He won't answer me.
And at that point, 911 dispatches the police to the house to investigate.
When officers arrive, they see nothing alarming. At first,
the front door is closed. There's no sign of a gunman.
There are no signs of forced entry.
Sheriff's office.
Not taking any chances, the police carefully make entry into the Shabazz home.
Inside, they find a horrific scene.
The first thing they see is Sal Shabazz lying on the floor.
He's laying in a pool of blood.
He had been shot 4 times.
Hard-working forklift driver and Army veteran Sal Shabazz was as all-American as they come.
Sal was a very nice guy, a cool person, easy to get along with.
He had integrity, he was kind, he was honest.
And he was raising 4 children with the love of his life, his wife, Danielle.
She was someone that he felt that he could build something with, build a life with, build a family with.
But now, police are at Sal and Danielle's home in response to a desperate 911 call.
Danielle, she's on the phone with her husband, and he hears a knock at the door, and the next thing she hears are these bangs.
Sal! Sal!
She knows in her gut something's wrong.
When police enter the home, they discover that Danielle was right to fear the worst.
Sal's lying on the floor in a pool of blood.
He was bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds.
He was pronounced dead at the scene.
When homicide detectives arrive, they start their investigation by examining Sal's body.
He's been shot 2 times in the torso, twice in the head, execution style.
Near the body, homicide detectives find 4 shell casings lying on the floor.
They then took those casings and sent them off to ballistics to be tested.
Ballistics could eventually lead detectives to the murder weapon, but there's little at the scene to suggest the killer's motive.
A thorough search of the home shows that there was nothing disturbed, which ruled out the potential for robbery.
This was deliberate. This was intentional.
The question was, why target Sal?
Looking for answers, the detectives canvassed the neighborhood.
Officers talked to neighbors and asked them if they had any information.
None of the neighbors reported seeing anything suspicious.
Everybody was asleep at the time of the crime.
But the canvas could still provide some crucial information.
How you doing?
Hey, the neighbor across the street had a doorbell camera.
Doorbells have been used in cases across the country to assist in getting information to police.
With the homeowner, detectives review the doorbell cam surveillance footage.
This video shows a black SUV which pulls up at 2 in the morning.
A shadowy black figure gets out of the SUV and then walks up to Sal's house.
Sal opened the door. They had an exchange of words.
Then the figure at the door pulled out a gun and started shooting.
The shooting played out exactly as Danielle described.
The video also appears to confirm that Sal's murder was a targeted hit.
The suspect jumps back in the SUV and he peels off with the headlights turned off.
This was strictly about killing this person.
But confirmation of how it happened doesn't get detectives any closer to solving the case.
They can't make out the person or the license plate number.
With no other leads, investigators turn to the closest thing to a witness they have.
Investigators' next move is to speak to the person who was on the phone when it happened, Danielle.
The officers sent a cruiser to pick Danielle up and bring her in to see if she could offer any additional information as to what happened to her husband.
We're sorry for your loss.
When Danielle sits down with detectives, it appears that she is still in shock.
This is a tough situation. Danielle just lost her husband. But police have to do their job.
Detectives ask Danielle to start by walking them through the events leading up to her call to 911.
We were just saying goodnight, and everything was just fine until someone knocked on the door.
Hold on, somebody's at the door.
She said he goes to the door, he answers it. She hears a conversation.
Sal.
And she hears what sounds like gunshots. And then the phone goes silent.
She just doesn't know what to do at that point.
However, Danielle does know one thing.
Do you have any idea who was at the door?
She does not hesitate to give them an answer.
There's no question in her mind who did this. No question.
It's this woman that works with me, Tashara Jackson.
Sal Shabazz's wife, Danielle, has just told detectives who she thinks gunned down the 39-year-old Army veteran in the foyer of their Newport News, Virginia home.
Sal!
Danielle tells investigators that she is convinced that Tashara Jackson, who was a fellow co-worker at the post office, is responsible for her husband's death.
What makes you think she was involved?
Tashara and I have been having problems.
She and Tashara have been going back and forth in a feud that began over a dispute at work.
What sort of problems?
I don't even know. It's just like we don't get along.
And according to Danielle, things had recently escalated.
She run into Tashara at the nail salon.
Well.
And I guess they have words.
I don't know what you looking at, so you need to put those eyeballs back in your head.
Her and Tashara got into a huge argument outside of the nail salon.
She did admit that while Tashara was getting her nails done, that she in fact slashed her tires.
You slashed Tashara tires?
I know I shouldn't have, but I just got so mad.
And things only got worse from there.
A few days later, according to Danielle, Tashara retaliated.
It was my birthday, and Sal took me to Vegas for the weekend.
When she got back, her car was vandalized.
Someone had spray painted the vehicle, slashed every single tire, and stuck a candy bar in her gas tank.
She knew exactly who it was. She knew that Tashara was behind it.
She didn't call the police, but she just didn't let it go either.
Danielle said the night of the murder, they went to go confront Tashara.
Sal went with you?
Yeah?
He only goes to protect her.
According to Danielle, the confrontation occurred outside a local restaurant.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, right on time. Come and get it.
Because you can't mind your business.
What you gonna do about it?
They get to scrapping, Tashara and Danielle. They're going at it.
Danielle says she was gaining the upper hand when Tashara threatened to take things to the next level.
While she beating Tashara down, Tashara hollers out, grab my pistol out of her car.
That's when Sal and Danielle decided it was time to go.
You guys left?
Yeah, we jumped in the car and we got out of there.
However, Danielle says she was afraid of what would happen next.
She felt like Tashara was going to retaliate.
So she grabs the girls, goes to a hotel.
She just felt that it was safer.
Sal didn't go to the hotel with you?
I tried to get him to come with us, but he wouldn't listen.
He wants to protect his house, protect his home. He doesn't know what's going to happen next. But he just wants to make sure that they have a home to come back to.
Can you please come?
I'm gonna stay here. I'm gonna protect this house, okay?
Sal, being a man, he's gonna stand his ground. If anybody comes up in here, they're gonna have to deal with me.
A few hours later, Sal was dead.
Which is why Danielle is so sure that Tashara killed him.
But while Danielle is certain, the detectives aren't so sure.
Why would this work feud escalate to where somebody is now dead?
It raises questions as Danielle trying to throw the detectives off to look in a different direction.
To rule her out definitively, detectives ask Danielle to submit to a GSR test.
It isn't uncommon in a murder to look at the spouse first.
They did do gunshot residue analysis just to make sure that she wasn't the shooter.
Based on the neighbor's door cam, though, the shooter wasn't a woman.
They are looking for a black male.
If she were not the trigger person, gunshot residue can be transferred very easily.
While they wait for the results, detectives move on to the only other lead they have, Tashara Jackson. But when she sits down for questioning the following morning, they're surprised by what they find.
She's the opposite of what Danielle portrays her as.
Tashara, based on Danielle's account, is evil, vindictive, but Tashara was in fact a loving, nurturing, church-going person with no criminal record, no violent history.
And according to Tashara, that's not the only thing contrary to what Danielle led them to believe.
Once detectives sit down with Tashara, they begin to hear a very different side of the feud between Tashara and Danielle.
Let me just tell you, she's crazy.
Tashara tells detectives that it is in fact Danielle who has been the instigator in this feud.
What supposedly triggered the feud is what really raised red flags for the detectives.
Tashara tells investigators the feud began when she found out that Danielle was having an affair with another one of their co-workers.
Danielle Shabazz told detectives investigating her husband's murder that she was certain her co-worker Tashara Jackson was responsible.
Danielle and Tashara work at the post office together, but over the past month or so, they've been having this feud.
But according to Tashara, Danielle hadn't told detectives the whole story.
Tashara reveals to detectives that Danielle was having an affair.
His name is Rob Barnes. He works with us at the post office.
That co-worker happens to be the husband of Tashara's best friend.
According to Tashara, the feud started because she was not happy that Danielle was sleeping with her best friend's husband.
Tashara felt like Danielle was the one who escalated the entire feud when she took it upon herself to slash her tires at the nail shop.
Is that when you trashed her car?
I never touched her car.
She makes it clear that she would have never attempted to hurt her and she would not have killed her husband.
Then who did?
You need to ask Danielle. She's the one who's been cheating.
Tashara is pointing the finger at Danielle, and Danielle is pointing the finger at Tashara.
However, if Danielle is having an affair, that could give her motive to get rid of her husband.
They knew that she didn't pull the trigger, but could she have possibly had her lover do it?
To determine if Tashara is telling the truth, detectives pull Danielle's phone records.
The detectives were able to confirm that she was, in fact, having an affair with Rob Barnes.
They find hundreds of very sexually explicit text messages between Danielle and Rob.
But as steamy as the affair was, it didn't appear to be a mere fling.
Danielle and Rob were exchanging I love you text messages.
They potentially want to be together now.
Could that have led to Sal's murder?
Or did Danielle have another reason to get rid of her husband?
When detectives dug into Danielle's past, they found out that her perfect marriage may have not been so perfect after all.
Records show that Danielle had taken out a protective order against Sal. Danielle told investigators that Sal had headbutted her after finding messages between Danielle and another man in her phone.
But when investigators talked to people who knew the couple, it sounds more like Danielle might not be so innocent.
He and Danielle had a very, very toxic relationship.
In fact, the problem started well before they were ever married.
For their senior prom, he took another young lady and Danielle sliced the tires on the car.
It was the same thing that Danielle did to Tashara years later.
According to Sal's mother, similar incidents occurred throughout the couple's relationship.
Once she was mad at Sal, she took all his clothes and put them in a pile and poured bleach on them.
By 2021, the marriage appeared all but over.
They were talking about separating, but he did not want to leave his kids. I used to tell Sal to make the necessary sacrifices to try to keep his family together for the sake of his girls.
But for all of Sal's reasons to stick things out, detectives soon learned that Danielle had potentially one big reason to want him gone.
Sal had a $156,000 life insurance policy.
The beneficiary is Danielle.
If Danielle is having this affair, the motive would be if I can get rid of my husband, collect on his policy, me and Rob Barnes got a couple extra dollars.
But an affair and a six-figure insurance policy still aren't enough to prove that Danielle was involved in her husband's death.
Nothing that the officers have is a nail in the coffin, but it damn sure didn't look good.
It did give detectives a little leverage, though.
Armed with what they've learned, detectives bring Danielle in for another round of questioning.
They immediately asked Danielle if she had any issues in her marriage to Sal.
What do you mean?
She told them they were fine, they were in a happy marriage.
She also disputes that she was messing around with Rob Barnes.
We're friends. We work together. That's all.
What she didn't know is investigators already saw the text messages.
Danielle finally concedes, yes, she was having an affair.
But it's not what you think.
She insists she had nothing to do with Sal's death.
Danielle tells detectives that she and Sal may not have had the perfect relationship, but she would have never wanted to hurt him.
She also informed the officers that she didn't even know about the life insurance policy until after he was dead.
Not that her denials do anything to relieve the detectives' suspicions.
She withheld vital information.
Still doesn't give investigators enough to charge her with anything.
However, there's also one piece of vital information that detectives have withheld from Danielle.
The gunshot residue test that was performed on Danielle during her first interview came back.
Danielle tested positive for gunshot residue.
Danielle, you tested positive for GSR.
How you gonna explain that?
When detectives investigating her husband's murder confronted Danielle Shabazz about the affair she was having with a coworker, the mother of four admitted that she'd been unfaithful.
While she finally owned up to the affair, she kept insisting she had nothing to do with her husband's murder.
Investigators find what Danielle is saying hard to believe.
Because detectives have recently received results from the gunshot residue test they conducted on Danielle just hours after the shooting.
And these results revealed that Danielle did in fact have residue on her hands.
When detectives confront Danielle with this information, she is genuinely stunned.
How you gonna explain that?
I did not shoot a gun that night. I swear.
Danielle is like, I have no idea where that came from.
And based on the evidence, it wasn't Danielle who shot Sal 4 times just inside the couple's front door.
They know that a man killed Sal.
If you go back to that video footage from the doorbell video, it definitely was a man who pulled the trigger.
But does that mean Danielle wasn't involved?
Detectives theorize that Danielle may have recruited her lover Rob to do the murder.
And when Danielle and her lover connected at a later point, that gunshot residue could have been transferred by the holding of hands or touching something that the trigger man touched.
Could that explain how gunshot residue ended up on Danielle's hands?
That's not the only possible explanation.
She could have gotten the residue on her hands in an innocent way.
It could have happened when she rode to the police station in the police cruiser.
Which means the gunshot residue alone is not enough to make an arrest.
All of that is just a theory rooted in speculation, and investigators will have to have more evidence before they are able to move forward with any murder charges.
And while Danielle and Rob's cell phone records provide plenty of evidence of an affair, that's all detectives are able to find.
They look through their text exchanges, and they don't have any evidence of any back and forth about plotting to kill Sal.
Police also found that there was no evidence in their phone records that had them reaching out to a third party to hire the hit.
In fact, the cell phone records appear to exonerate both Danielle and her lover.
When detectives pulled their GPS locations at the time of the murder, they hit a stumbling block.
Rob nor Danielle were even in the area based on the data from the phone records.
She was nowhere close, nor was Rob.
Does that mean Danielle and her lover are innocent? Or does it mean they're smart?
Maybe Rob left his phone at home on purpose, and Danielle made that phone call to Sal from the hotel so the cops couldn't place her at the scene.
Either way, the detectives are no closer to solving Sal's murder.
They just don't have enough evidence.
They didn't have a choice other than to continue with the investigation.
So detectives decide to take a second look at Tashara Jackson, the co-worker Danielle named as Sal's killer.
Just to rule her out, the detectives pulled Tashara's cell phone records.
Although instead of ruling Tashara out, the detectives make a surprising discovery.
GPS evidence puts Tashara in close proximity to the scene of the killing, at the time of the killing.
The records don't put her at the scene of the crime, but the reason why also arouses suspicion.
Tashara's phone was turned off only moments before the murder.
Wasn't turned back on until several hours after.
This is a stunning revelation for police. Maybe Danielle was right from the beginning, and Tashara did have something to do with Sal's murder.
However, there is still one piece of the puzzle missing.
They know that Sal was shot by a man.
She must have been waiting in the car when it happened, but who could it have been that got out of the car and actually pulled the trigger?
Digging through Tashara's phone records, the detectives soon come up with a possible answer.
In the weeks leading up to the murder, Tashara had been communicating regularly with another man who also worked at the post office.
His name is Jeremy Petway.
And they weren't talking about mail. They were having an affair.
Which is wild, considering Danielle's workplace affair is what started the feud with Tashara.
All these people sleeping around. What the heck they had going on in that post office?
Based on the text messages, Tashara's affair with Jeremy was just as hot and heavy as Danielle's tryst with Rob.
Nude photos had been sent, and the conversation even included how good their sex was. They also discussed leaving their partners and being together.
And much more important for detectives, that's not all the lovers discussed.
There are text messages where Tashara is telling Mr. Petway that she appreciates him looking out for her.
Jeremy takes back that he was the protector.
They have this exchange about being Bonnie and Clyde.
Detectives investigating the murder of 39-year-old Sal Shabazz were all but convinced that his wife Danielle was behind his death. But new information has just turned the case on its head.
Cell phone records put Danielle's co-worker, Tashara Jackson, and Tashara's lover, Jeremy Petway, near the scene where the murder occurred.
Danielle had been pointing the finger at Tashara from the beginning.
She and this coworker had some sort of a feud or rivalry.
Based on Tashara and Jeremy's text, Danielle was right about Tashara all along.
Although Tashara and Jeremy do not openly admit to killing Sal Shabazz, the implications are clear. In the days following the shooting, Tashara told Jeremy, "You didn't hesitate."
And he calls them Bonnie and Clyde.
To detectives, it is clear that they are gloating about their crime.
And one of Jeremy's last text messages leaves little doubt they're responsible for Sal's death.
Jeremy tells Tashara, "I gave the gun to one of our friends at work."
Detectives assumed they're texting about the murder weapon.
Investigators quickly follow up on what they've learned from the phone records.
Investigators got a warrant to search the home of the friend that Jeremy mentioned in the text message.
Police show up to this person's house.
Who else is in the house with you?
And as luck would have it, Jeremy is also there.
Jeremy, step outside. You're under arrest. Put your hands behind your back.
The police place Jeremy under arrest and search the house.
Upstairs under the friend's bed, detectives find the handgun.
The officers send the gun straight to ballistics to be tested. And when the results came back, it was indeed the weapon that was used to kill Sal.
It's just slam dunk in the mind of the investigators.
Detectives also take Tashara into custody.
She asks for an attorney and refuses to make a statement.
And at the police station, Jeremy insists that the only relationship they have is as co-workers.
But Jeremy's denials and Tashara's silence do little to deter the detectives.
Even without their confessions, police are ready to charge them with first-degree murder.
Newport News police did their job, and they did it well.
Despite everyone suspecting Danielle, the arrest couldn't have happened without her.
She was a big help because she was on the phone when it all happened.
She was also the person to first put the police on to Tashara.
But when Tashara Jackson goes on trial in March of 2022, it's also clear that her feud with Danielle led directly to Sal's death.
All of this started with Tashara not being happy about Danielle having an affair with her best friend's husband.
The disagreement escalated when Tashara and Danielle got into the argument in front of the nail salon. Danielle slashed Tashara's tires.
To retaliate, Tashara vandalized Danielle's car.
And things only escalated from there.
That led to the beatdown that Danielle gave Tashara in the restaurant parking lot.
For Tashara, it was the last straw.
She wanted to end this feud once and for all.
Prosecutors lay out how, after that altercation at the restaurant, Tashara calls her friend, Jeremy.
Now, we need to get this girl. We're gonna get her.
That begins the murder plot that ultimately ends in the death of Sal.
Just bring the car and bring the gun.
And early on the morning of April 7th, just hours after the parking lot showdown, Tashara and Jeremy set their plan in motion.
Using their phone records, prosecutors was able to show that Jeremy went to pick Tashara up.
Then, as they neared Danielle and Sal's house, Jeremy and Tashara turned off their phones.
She turns her cell phone off, not realizing that investigators can go back and see that you turned it off just before this man got killed.
But the neighbor's doorbell cam captured what happened next.
Jeremy got out of the car and went up to Danielle and Sal's front door.
They intended to shoot her, but they didn't know she wasn't at home.
They had no idea that Danielle had taken the children to the hotel.
So?
Instead, it was Sal who answered the door.
Yeah, I heard you got a problem with Tashara.
Man, we know what happened.
What are you talking about, man? Well, don't even worry about it.
Had Danielle answered the door, she would have been the one who was killed.
Then Jeremy ditched the gun with a friend, and when detectives brought her in for questioning, Tashara used the affair to turn suspicion towards Danielle.
Then who did?
You need to ask Danielle. She's the one who's been cheating.
They thought they had it all figured out.
But the defense can't explain away Tashara's phone records.
With the text messages, there's no doubt left that this is what happened.
Even though they did not have confessions, they did not have eyewitnesses, they had enough evidence that when you put it all together, it painted one very ugly picture.
Would it be enough to convince the jury?
The jury finds Tashara guilty after less than an hour of deliberation.
And Jeremy meets the same fate.
Jeremy is convicted following his own trial.
They were both sentenced to 39 years in prison.
Tashara's lawyer tried to argue the fact that, well, since he pulled the trigger, maybe we can give her less time. The judge said, nope, she gonna get the same time as he got.
Even though the family of the deceased wanted life without parole, they were satisfied with the verdict.
I think about the number of families that don't get justice. I'll take 39 years, it's better than nothing.
But no amount of time can make up for the injustice done to Saladin Shabazz.
This was a man who served his country. This was a man who was married to the love of his life. And even though they had issues and problems, the thing that should have ended their marriage was divorce, not death.
The pain of losing my child will never go away. You mourn for that for the rest of your life. But just because he's gone out of this earth, don't mean he gone. Because he's with me.
The summer of 1893 arrived in Chicago like a promise. Across the city, railroad whistles echoed through the morning haze. Steam rose from locomotives carrying visitors from every corner of America. Horse-drawn carriages rattled over uneven streets. Newspapers shouted headlines about innovation, progress, and a future brighter than anything the 19th century had ever imagined. The World's Columbian Exposition was about to transform Chicago into the center of the world. Millions of people would come. Families carrying suitcases. Newlyweds searching for adventure. Young women chasing careers beyond the limits of small towns. Salesmen dreamers, immigrants, inventors, and tourists. They traveled for days by train to witness the wonders of a new age. What they found was a city glowing with ambition. What some of them never realized was that among the crowds stood a man watching. A man smiling. A man shaking hands. A man offering rooms, employment, opportunity, and trust. A man who would eventually become one of the most infamous names in American criminal history. H. Holmes. More than a century later, his name still carries a strange power. Mention it in a dark room, and people immediately think of secret corridors, hidden chambers, trapdoors, gas lines, skeletons, the so-called murder castle. But before there was a legend, there was a man. And before there was a monster, there were victims. The truth is far more unsettling than the myth. Because monsters are easy to recognize. H. Holmes was not. Imagine arriving in Chicago, in the summer heat of 1893. You have traveled hundreds of miles. Your savings are tucked carefully inside a purse or coat pocket. The city feels enormous compared to the quiet place you left behind. Buildings stretch upward. Streets overflow with strangers. Everywhere there is noise, excitement, possibility. You are looking for a place to stay. A job. A friendly face. Someone points you toward a handsome businessman who owns a building in Englewood. People say he is educated, successful, polite, a doctor, a gentleman. When you finally meet him, nothing seems unusual. His clothes are immaculate. His voice is calm. His eyes never linger too long. He asks questions about your journey. He remembers your name. He laughs at the right moments. He appears interested in your future. You leave the conversation feeling fortunate. You trust him. Many people did. That trust would become one of the deadliest weapons he ever possessed. Long before investigators uncovered evidence. Long before reporters filled newspapers with horrifying stories. Long before courtrooms and prison cells entered the picture, Holmes was building something. Brick by brick. Room by room. Floor by floor. The structure stood on a busy corner in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood. At first glance, it looked ordinary enough. Businesses occupied the lower level. Apartments and offices sat above. Construction workers came and went. Yet strange stories began circulating among those who worked there. Contractors were frequently hired and fired. Certain sections remained unfinished. Some workers complained they were never allowed to see complete blueprints. Others claimed Holmes seemed obsessed with controlling every detail of the building. Most people dismissed these stories. Construction projects were chaotic. Businessmen could be eccentric. Nothing about the building appeared sinister. Not yet. Years later, after Holmes was arrested, reporters would describe the structure as a labyrinth designed specifically for murder. Whether every claim was true remains one of the greatest mysteries surrounding the case. What cannot be denied is that investigators eventually discovered disturbing evidence inside. Evidence suggesting that behind the walls of an ordinary-looking building, terrible things had happened. But in the summer of 1893, nobody knew any of that. The White City dazzled visitors. Electric lights illuminated the night. Music drifted through crowded avenues. The giant Ferris wheel carried passengers high above the fairgrounds. For many Americans, the exposition represented the future itself. People came seeking wonder. Some never returned home. Their disappearances often attracted little attention. America was a large country. Communication was slow. Records were incomplete. A young woman moving to Chicago might leave behind family hundreds of miles away. If letters stopped arriving, relatives might assume she had started a new life elsewhere. Weeks became months. Months became years. Questions remained unanswered. In hindsight, that uncertainty created the perfect hunting ground. The city was overflowing with strangers. The fair provided endless opportunities. And Holmes understood something that many criminals never grasp. Violence alone does not make a predator dangerous. Trust does. Witnesses later described him as charming, persuasive, almost impossible to dislike upon first meeting. Women found him attentive. Business associates found him intelligent. Customers found him professional. He possessed the rare ability to become exactly what another person wanted to see. To a lonely woman, he appeared caring. To an investor, he appeared ambitious. To a colleague, he appeared dependable. Every conversation became a performance. Every relationship became a transaction. Every smile concealed calculation. And yet, even now, historians continue debating where reality ends and legend begins. How many people did Holmes truly kill? 9. 27. More? The answer remains frustratingly uncertain. Newspapers of the era competed fiercely for readers. Sensational stories sold copies. The public could not get enough of the mysterious doctor and his alleged castle of horrors. The more terrifying the details became, the faster they spread. Some reports claimed Holmes murdered hundreds. Others described torture chambers and elaborate execution devices. Readers devoured every word. The legend grew larger than the man himself. But hidden beneath exaggeration and rumor lies something undeniable. Real people disappeared. Real families suffered. Real bodies were found. The facts alone are disturbing enough. You do not need myths when the truth already feels like a nightmare. Perhaps that is why the case continues to fascinate people more than a century later. It exists in two worlds simultaneously. One is the world of documented history. The other is the world of urban legend. They overlap so completely that separating them becomes almost impossible. Even experienced researchers still argue about key details. Did Holmes personally kill every victim attributed to him? Were all the features described inside the murder castle actually present? How much of the story was embellished by reporters seeking headlines? Those questions remain open. Yet one fact stands untouched by uncertainty. At the center of every version stands the same man. Herman Webster Mudgett. Known to history as H. Holmes. A man who reinvented himself repeatedly. A man who lied with extraordinary ease. A man who manipulated friends, lovers, employees, and business partners. A man whose greatest talent may not have been murder at all. It may have been persuasion. Because murder leaves evidence. Persuasion leaves opportunities. And Holmes seemed capable of creating opportunities everywhere he went. By the time authorities finally closed in on him, the investigation would stretch across multiple states. Insurance fraud. Missing persons. False identities. Financial scams. Dead children. A murdered business partner. The trail became so tangled that detectives struggled to follow it. Each answer uncovered new questions. Each discovery revealed deeper deception. The man they pursued seemed to exist behind countless masks. Just when investigators believed they understood him, another secret emerged. Just when they thought the story could not become darker, it did. And somewhere behind all the headlines, beyond the courtroom drama and public fascination, stood the people who paid the highest price. Women who trusted him. Children who depended on adults to protect them. Families waiting for letters that would never arrive. Mothers searching train stations. Fathers refusing to accept silence. Brothers and sisters clinging to hope long after hope should have vanished. For them, this was never a legend. It was loss. The years would transform H. Holmes into a cultural icon of evil. Books would be written. Documentaries would be filmed. Arguments would rage over what really happened inside that building in Chicago. But before we enter the maze of rumors and investigations, before detectives begin piecing together clues, before the newspapers unleash a storm of sensational headlines, we must start where every true crime story begins. With people. Not monsters. Not myths. People. People who dreamed. People who trusted. People who crossed paths with a man who seemed ordinary. A man whose polite smile concealed secrets darker than anyone could imagine. And as the World's Fair welcomed millions into Chicago, as electric lights illuminated the future, and crowds celebrated progress, another story was quietly unfolding in the shadows. A story of deception. A story of disappearance. A story that would become one of the most infamous criminal cases in American history. The city was celebrating a new century. But hidden behind the excitement, hidden behind the crowds, hidden behind the face of a respected businessman, something far more sinister was waiting. And before it was over, the name H. Holmes would become immortal. In the years before the world would know the name H. Holmes, before newspapers turned him into a symbol of evil, and before detectives began untangling one of the most bewildering criminal investigations of the 19th century, there was another story unfolding. It was the story of America itself. The nation was changing faster than anyone could fully comprehend. The Civil War had ended less than 3 decades earlier, yet the country already seemed transformed. Railroads stretched across thousands of miles of countryside. Factories multiplied along rivers and city streets. New inventions appeared almost every month. Telegraph wires carried messages at speeds that would have seemed miraculous only a generation before. The old America of farms and isolated villages was giving way to something larger, louder, and more complicated. Cities were growing at a breathtaking pace. Among them, none embodied that transformation more dramatically than Chicago. In 1871, much of the city had been consumed by the Great Chicago Fire. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath walls of flame. Thousands lost their homes. Many believed the disaster would cripple the city for decades. Instead, Chicago rebuilt itself with astonishing determination. By the late 1880s, it had become one of the fastest-growing urban centers in the world. Smoke rose from factories day and night. Freight trains thundered through rail yards. Ships crowded the waterfront. New buildings seemed to appear almost overnight. The city carried an energy that was impossible to ignore. Opportunity lived there. Money lived there. Ambition lived there. And where ambition flourishes, so do those willing to exploit it. Thousands of newcomers arrived every week. Some came from neighboring states. Others crossed oceans from Europe. Many arrived with little more than a suitcase and a dream. Chicago did not ask where they came from. It only asked whether they could survive. For young men seeking fortune and young women seeking independence, the city represented possibility unlike anything their hometowns could offer. But possibility came with risk. The streets were crowded with strangers. People changed addresses frequently. Employers hired and fired workers without warning. Records were incomplete. Disappearance could go unnoticed. A person might leave one boarding house and move into another across town. They might accept a new job. They might board a train and never tell anyone where they were headed. In such a city, it was surprisingly easy to vanish. And into this environment walked a man named Herman Webster Mudgett. He was born in 1861 in the small town of Gilmanton, New Hampshire. At first glance, his early life seemed unremarkable. His family was religious. His parents were strict. Neighbors later described him as intelligent and reserved. He was not the kind of child who immediately attracted attention. Yet stories emerged over the years that hinted at something darker beneath the surface. Some accounts claimed he enjoyed manipulating other children. Others suggested he displayed an unusual fascination with death. As with many details surrounding Holmes, separating fact from legend is difficult. Some stories may have been exaggerated after his crimes became famous. Human beings often search for signs of evil in a killer's childhood, trying to locate the exact moment when a monster first appeared. Reality is rarely that simple. What is known is that Herman was exceptionally intelligent. He performed well in school. He understood how to present himself. He learned early that people trusted confidence. He learned that appearances mattered. Most importantly, he learned that intelligence could become a tool. A weapon. A disguise. As he grew older, he pursued medical studies. Medicine carried prestige in 19th-century America. Doctors occupied positions of respect. Their knowledge gave them authority. Patients trusted them with their lives. For someone like Herman, the profession offered more than education. It offered access. While attending medical school, he reportedly became involved in fraudulent schemes involving cadavers. Insurance companies could be deceived. Death certificates could be manipulated. Identities could be altered. The details varied from case to case, but a pattern seemed to emerge. Again and again, Herman discovered ways to turn deception into profit. Most criminals begin with violence. He began with fraud. Violence creates enemies. Fraud creates opportunities. By the time he reached adulthood, he had become remarkably skilled at creating false identities and misleading those around him. Then came a decision that would change everything. In 1886, he moved to Chicago. The city welcomed ambitious newcomers. No one cared much about their past. Reinvention was part of Chicago's culture. A man could arrive with one name and build a future under another. That was exactly what Herman did. Somewhere along the way, Herman Webster Mudgett became H. Holmes. The new name sounded professional, respectable, memorable. It carried none of the baggage attached to his earlier life. It was not merely a name change. It was a transformation. The creation of a character. The beginning of a performance that would last for years. Holmes quickly adapted to city life. He understood how to make favorable first impressions. He dressed well. He spoke confidently. He knew when to smile and when to remain serious. People often described him as charming. Not charming in the dramatic sense portrayed in films, but in a quieter, more effective way. He listened carefully. He remembered details. He made people feel important. A customer entering his business might leave feeling valued. An employee might believe they had found a trustworthy employer. A woman might mistake attention for affection. That ability became one of the foundations of his success. And eventually, one of the foundations of his crimes. Chicago was preparing for something extraordinary. In 1893, the city would host the world's Columbian Exposition. The event was designed to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas. The scale was almost impossible to imagine. Organizers envisioned grand architecture, technological wonders, international exhibits, and entertainment unlike anything the public had ever seen. Construction began years in advance. Investments poured into the city. Businesses expanded. Hotels multiplied. Property values climbed. Every entrepreneur recognized the same opportunity. Millions of visitors would soon arrive. Millions. To homes, that number represented more than economic potential. It represented anonymity. Crowds. Strangers. People far from home. People whose movements would be difficult to track. People who might never be reported missing immediately. While Chicago transformed itself into a global destination, Holmes was pursuing his own project. In the Englewood neighborhood, on the city's south side, he acquired property and began constructing a large building. From the outside, it appeared practical and respectable. Commercial space occupied the lower floor. Additional rooms rose above. Workers came and went. Construction continued in phases. Nothing about the structure immediately alarmed nearby residents. It blended naturally into the growing neighborhood. Yet stories later emerged suggesting that the project was unusual from the beginning. Contractors complained of confusion. Some were hired only to be dismissed shortly afterward. Others were instructed to complete specific tasks, without understanding how those tasks fit into the overall design. Very few people ever saw the entire plan. Holmes maintained tight control over every detail. To neighbors, he appeared ambitious. To investors, he appeared resourceful. To employees, he appeared demanding but professional. No one could yet see the future significance of the building. No one knew that newspapers would eventually give it a terrifying nickname. The Murder Castle. But that label would come later. For now, it was simply another structure in a rapidly expanding city. Around it, life continued normally. Streetcars rattled past storefronts. Children played near sidewalks. Shopkeepers swept dust from entrances each morning. Immigrant families built new lives. Workers hurried toward factories before sunrise. Chicago remained a city obsessed with progress. And progress often blinded people to danger. There was so much growth. So much movement. So much excitement. People rarely stopped to ask difficult questions. A missing employee could be explained away. A tenant moving out suddenly was not unusual. A woman accepting a new opportunity elsewhere seemed entirely plausible. The city itself encouraged constant motion. Everything was temporary. Everything was changing. Everything was moving forward. Within that atmosphere, Holmes thrived. He cultivated relationships. He expanded business ventures. He projected confidence and success. Those who met him often saw exactly what he wanted them to see. A doctor. A businessman. A gentleman. Not a predator. Certainly not a killer. Yet beneath the carefully crafted image, another reality was beginning to take shape. A reality built on lies. A reality sustained by manipulation. A reality that would eventually consume innocent lives. Years later, investigators would search through records, trying to determine precisely when Holmes crossed the line from fraudster to murderer. The answer remains uncertain. What is certain is that by the early 1890s, the foundations of the tragedy were already in place. The city was ready. The World's Fair was approaching. Millions of visitors would soon flood Chicago's streets. And standing quietly among the excitement was a man who had spent years perfecting his ability to deceive. The stage was set. The crowds were coming. The lights of the White City would soon shine across the nation. And while America celebrated innovation, progress, and the promise of a new century, darkness was gathering behind the walls of a building in Englewood. Few people noticed it. No one understood it. But history was already moving toward a nightmare that would outlive everyone involved. The legend of H.H. Holmes had not yet begun. But the conditions that made it possible were already falling into place. Every true crime story eventually arrives at the same painful truth. A case may become famous because of the killer. History may remember the investigation. Books may focus on the mystery. But behind every headline are human beings whose lives were interrupted forever. In the story of H.H. Holmes, that truth is especially important. For more than a century, people have been fascinated by the legend of the murder castle. They remember the rumors of secret rooms and hidden passages. They remember the image of a smiling doctor concealing monstrous intentions. What many forget are the individuals who walked through his doors believing they had found safety, opportunity, friendship, or love. They were not characters in a horror story. They were real people. They had plans for the future. They wrote letters. They worried about money. They laughed with friends. They dreamed about better lives. And one by one, some of those dreams disappeared into the shadow cast by H.H. Holmes. Among the names most closely associated with his crimes, one stands out not only because of her tragic fate, but because her story reveals how Holmes operated. Her name was Julia Connor. To understand Julia's story, it helps to imagine Chicago during the late 1880s. The city was expanding rapidly. Businesses opened and closed with astonishing speed. Young couples arrived hoping to build stable lives in a place overflowing with opportunity. Julia was one of countless women trying to navigate that changing world. She was married to a man named Ned Connor. Like many families of the era, they worked hard and hoped for financial security. Together, they became connected to Holmes through business arrangements involving his building in Englewood. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Holmes presented himself as successful and trustworthy. Employees respected him. Customers relied on him. He seemed to possess the confidence of a man destined to prosper. Julia likely saw the same version of Holmes that everyone else saw. The charming businessman. The educated professional. The attentive listener. The kind of man who always seemed to know the right thing to say. But Holmes had a talent for identifying emotional vulnerabilities. He paid attention. He observed. He learned what people wanted. Then he positioned himself as the answer. Over time, Holmes and Julia grew closer. Exactly how their relationship developed remains uncertain, but evidence suggests it became romantic. For Holmes, relationships rarely appeared to involve genuine affection. They were opportunities. Methods of control. Ways to gain influence over another person's decisions. Julia found herself increasingly drawn into his orbit. Meanwhile, her marriage deteriorated. Tensions grew. Eventually, Ned Connor separated from both Julia and Holmes. When he left, he carried concerns with him. Concerns that would later haunt him. He reportedly warned Julia about Holmes. He sensed something troubling beneath the polished exterior. But warnings are often difficult to hear when they challenge emotions, hopes, and trust. Life continued. Julia remained connected to Holmes. And then, near the end of 1891, she vanished. One day she was there. The next she was gone. Along with her disappeared her young daughter, Pearl. Pearl was only a child. A little girl with an entire life ahead of her. A little girl who should have grown up, attended school, built friendships, and eventually become an adult with memories of childhood adventures. Instead, her future ended before it truly began. When Julia and Pearl disappeared, Holmes provided explanations. He always had explanations. Perhaps they had moved away. Perhaps they had started a new life elsewhere. Perhaps there was nothing unusual at all. In the rapidly changing environment of Chicago, such stories were often accepted. People moved frequently. Communication was inconsistent. Not every disappearance immediately triggered alarm. Yet years later, investigators would come to believe that both Julia and Pearl had become victims of Holmes. The certainty of their final moments remains lost to history. What remains is the tragedy of possibilities never fulfilled. A mother. A daughter. Gone. And they would not be the last. Another name frequently linked to Holmes is Minnie Williams. If Julia's story demonstrated Holmes's ability to manipulate emotions, Minnie's story revealed his skill as a predator of opportunity. Minnie was young, educated, and ambitious. She arrived in Chicago seeking independence and success. Like countless women of her generation, she wanted more than the narrow expectations society often imposed. She wanted control over her future. Holmes appeared at exactly the right moment. Or perhaps, from another perspective, exactly the wrong one. He presented himself as a successful businessman capable of helping her. The relationship deepened. At some point, Holmes convinced Minnie to transfer property rights and financial interests into arrangements that benefited him. It was a pattern investigators would later recognize repeatedly. Holmes rarely relied solely on violence. He preferred manipulation first. Trust first. Dependence first. Only afterward came disappearance. Minnie eventually vanished. So did her sister, Nanny Williams. The sisters had once been connected by family bonds and shared futures. Then both disappeared from the historical record. Their names would later emerge among the list of suspected victims linked to Holmes. For relatives waiting for letters, the silence must have felt unbearable. At first, there would have been optimism. Perhaps travel delays. Perhaps new opportunities. Perhaps simple misunderstandings. Then concern. Then fear. Then the gradual realization that something was terribly wrong. That emotional journey repeats throughout the Holmes case. Again and again, families experience the same pattern. Hope. Confusion. Anxiety. Silence. Loss. What makes these stories particularly haunting is how ordinary they began. None of the victims woke up believing they were entering a famous criminal case. They woke up expecting normal days. Work. Conversations. Plans. Meals. Small hopes for the future. The future simply ended before they could reach it. As investigators later reconstructed Holmes's life, another troubling pattern emerged. Many of the people connected to him were women searching for stability during a period of enormous social change. America was evolving. Women were increasingly pursuing careers, education, and independence. Cities offered opportunities unavailable in smaller communities. Yet those opportunities also carried risks. A woman arriving alone in Chicago often depended on employers, landlords, or acquaintances for support. Trust became essential. And Holmes excelled at earning trust. He understood social expectations. His status as a doctor and businessman provided credibility. His appearance suggested respectability. His manners suggested reliability. The disguise was remarkably effective. Even today, photographs of Holmes can be unsettling. Not because he appears terrifying. Because he does not. He looks ordinary. Perhaps even pleasant. The face staring back from those old photographs resembles countless professionals of the era. That normality forces an uncomfortable realization. Danger does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives wearing a suit. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it offers assistance. And sometimes it becomes impossible to recognize until it is too late. As the years passed, Holmes continued building relationships and expanding his influence. People entered his world. Some left. Some did not. The growing list of missing individuals remained scattered across different places and different circumstances. No one yet understood the larger pattern. No one could see the complete picture. That picture would only emerge later, after investigators began pulling together fragments from multiple lives. Fragments of letters. Fragments of financial records. Fragments of witness statements. Fragments of memory. One family searching for answers might never realize another family was experiencing the same nightmare hundreds of miles away. Yet beneath all the uncertainty, a common thread connected them. H. Holmes. The man at the center of every story. The man who always seemed to be nearby when lives suddenly changed course. The man who always possessed another explanation. Another excuse. Another carefully crafted lie. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this chapter is that many victims likely trusted him until the very end. Human beings naturally want to believe in good intentions. We want to believe that kindness is genuine. That friendship is sincere. That professional success reflects character. Holmes exploited those instincts with extraordinary effectiveness. He weaponized trust. And because trust is invisible, its destruction leaves wounds that extend far beyond a single victim. Families lose faith. Communities question themselves. Survivors wonder whether warning signs existed. Whether something could have been done differently. Whether tragedy could have been prevented. Those questions rarely have satisfying answers. By the early 1890s, Holmes's life was becoming increasingly complicated. Business schemes multiplied. Relationships overlapped. Financial pressures mounted. The number of secrets he carried continued growing. At the same time, Chicago moved closer to the opening of the World's Columbian Exposition. Millions of visitors were preparing to arrive. The city buzzed with anticipation. Hotels filled. Investors celebrated. Entrepreneurs rushed to capitalize on the coming crowds. For Holmes, the approaching fair represented unprecedented opportunity. For future victims, it represented danger they could not yet see. Some were already gone. Others had not yet crossed paths with him. Still others were living ordinary lives, unaware that history was quietly moving them toward catastrophe. When we look back today, it is tempting to view the victims only through the lens of their deaths. But that would be another injustice. Julia Connor was more than a victim. Pearl Connor was more than a victim. Minnie Williams was more than a victim. Nanny Williams was more than a victim. They were people whose lives contained joys, fears, ambitions, relationships, and dreams long before they became names in a criminal investigation. Their stories matter, because they remind us what was truly stolen. Not simply lives. Futures. Entire futures. And as Chicago prepared to welcome the world in 1893, while excitement spread through every corner of the city, those stolen futures remained hidden beneath layers of deception. The public saw progress. They saw opportunity. They saw celebration. What they did not see was the growing trail of loss behind one of the city's most respected businessmen. A trail that would soon become impossible to ignore. A trail leading directly toward one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history. By the spring of 1893, Chicago no longer felt like a city preparing for an event. It felt like a city preparing for history. Every railroad arriving from the east carried new passengers. Every hotel lobby overflowed with visitors speaking different languages and carrying different dreams. Newspapers across the country described the upcoming World's Columbian Exposition with near-religious excitement. It promised a glimpse of the future, a celebration of American achievement, and an experience unlike anything the world had ever seen. The White City rose from the shores of Lake Michigan like something from a fantasy. Its enormous buildings gleamed beneath electric lights. At night, visitors stood in stunned silence as entire avenues glowed with artificial illumination. To many Americans, electricity still felt magical. The fairgrounds appeared less like a collection of buildings and more like a vision of civilization itself. People came seeking wonder. Some found it. Others found something else. Far from the fairgrounds, several miles south in the Englewood neighborhood, another structure stood waiting. It lacked the grandeur of the White City. It had no shining domes. No magnificent fountains. No international exhibits. Yet history would remember it long after many attractions of the World's Fair had faded into memory. The building belonged to H. Holmes. At first glance, nothing about it inspired fear. Shops occupied portions of the ground floor. Offices and living quarters occupied sections above. The building blended naturally into its surroundings. Residents passed by without hesitation. Customers entered and exited throughout the day. Life appeared normal. Normality was Holmes's greatest disguise. Inside, he maintained the image he had spent years creating. The successful businessman. The respected doctor. The ambitious entrepreneur. People trusted him because he looked like someone they were supposed to trust. That trust became increasingly important as Chicago filled with strangers. The World's Fair attracted millions. Among them were young women searching for work. Travelers needing temporary lodging. Employees hoping for opportunity. People far from home. People with few local connections. People who could disappear without immediate alarm. For Holmes, the timing could not have been better. Historians continue debating exactly how many victims he claimed during these years. The uncertainty itself speaks volumes. The records are incomplete. The evidence fragmented. Some disappearances can never be fully explained. Yet certain names continue appearing throughout the story. Names connected to Holmes through business dealings, friendships, employment, or romantic relationships. Names that suddenly vanish from the historical record. As the fair opened and crowds poured into Chicago, Holmes appeared to thrive. Visitors saw confidence. Success. Respectability. No one saw the growing darkness hidden behind those appearances. The true horror of the Holmes case does not begin with a single dramatic moment. It begins with a pattern. A pattern so gradual that almost nobody recognized it while it was happening. One person disappeared. Then another. Then another. Each case seemed isolated. Each explanation seemed plausible enough to avoid immediate suspicion. A woman moved away. An employee found a better opportunity. A tenant relocated. A business arrangement ended. Life in Chicago moved quickly. Questions rarely lingered. But eventually, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Among the most haunting aspects of the case is how ordinary many victims' final known days appeared. There were no warnings written across the sky. No dramatic confrontations. No signs that history was about to remember them. A conversation. A business meeting. A promise. A plan for tomorrow. Then silence. For Julia Connor and her daughter Pearl, that silence arrived near the end of 1891. Although their disappearance occurred before the World's Fair, their absence would later become one of the earliest and most disturbing chapters connected to Holmes. Neighbors noticed they were gone. Questions emerged. Answers never came. Holmes offered explanations. He always offered explanations. Yet the explanations shifted over time. Details changed. Stories evolved. And years later, investigators would become convinced that neither Julia nor Pearl had left voluntarily. The little girl whose future should have stretched across decades simply vanished from history. No farewell. No certainty. Only absence. That absence lingered. Then came other disappearances. Minnie Williams entered Holmes's life carrying hopes common to many young women of her era. She sought independence, opportunity, control over her future. Instead, she became entangled with a man who seemed uniquely capable of turning trust into vulnerability. Holmes cultivated relationships carefully. He rarely rushed. He understood patience. He understood how to create emotional dependence. He knew how to become indispensable. For victims, the danger often arrived disguised as affection, or friendship, or professional assistance. Minnie eventually disappeared. Later, her sister Nanny disappeared as well. Again, uncertainty surrounded the details. Again, explanations emerged. Again, questions remained unanswered. By themselves, these cases were troubling. Together, they formed something more disturbing. A growing shadow. A trail. A pattern. Still, the city remained distracted. Chicago's attention focused on the World's Fair. Visitors marveled at engineering achievements. Inventors unveiled innovations. Crowds lined up to ride the giant Ferris wheel. Music drifted across the fairgrounds. Restaurants overflowed. Hotels filled to capacity. The city celebrated progress. Yet beneath that celebration, another story unfolded. A much darker one. Imagine arriving in Chicago during the summer of 1893. The train journey has finally ended. You step onto a crowded platform. Steam rises around you. Porters carry luggage through the noise. Vendors shout advertisements. The city feels enormous. Overwhelming. Exciting. You know almost no one. You need a place to stay. Perhaps employment. Perhaps guidance. Then someone introduces you to Dr. Holmes. The encounter seems fortunate. He is polite. Professional. Helpful. His smile appears sincere. His manner inspires confidence. Nothing about him triggers alarm. That is what makes the story so unsettling. The danger never looked dangerous. It looked trustworthy. The World's Fair provided an endless flow of new faces. Most visitors enjoyed their experiences and returned home safely. But investigators later wondered how many vulnerable individuals crossed paths with Holmes during those crowded months. How many entered his building? How many accepted his offers? How many trusted him? Some questions would never be answered. The passage of time erased too much evidence. Memories faded. Witnesses died. Records disappeared. What remains are fragments. Fragments suggesting that while Chicago celebrated one of the greatest events in American history, tragedy was unfolding behind closed doors. The building itself gradually became the center of speculation. Stories circulated after Holmes's arrest. Some described hidden rooms. Others described concealed passages. Some claimed victims were trapped inside soundproof chambers. Others spoke of gas lines and secret mechanisms. The stories multiplied with astonishing speed. Newspapers competed fiercely for sensational details. Every reporter wanted the most horrifying version of events. Every editor wanted readers to buy another edition. As a result, separating truth from exaggeration became difficult. Even modern historians disagree about certain claims. Yet regardless of how much later journalists embellished, one fact remains undeniable. Investigators found evidence that something terrible had occurred inside the building. Human remains. Personal belongings. Signs of destruction. Signs of concealment. Signs that people had entered and never emerged. The reality did not require embellishment. Reality was horrifying enough. What makes Holmes different from many killers is that violence alone does not define his crimes. Manipulation does. He did not rely on physical force at first contact. He relied on persuasion. He convinced victims to trust him, to believe him, to lower their guard. Only then did danger emerge. That approach made him extraordinarily difficult to detect. Victims often entered his world voluntarily. Friends defended him. Associates respected him. Customers appreciated him. The image he projected acted as a shield. Every compliment strengthened that shield. Every successful business transaction reinforced it. Every positive reputation protected him from suspicion. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the consequences grew. Families waited for letters that never arrived. Friends wondered why communication had stopped. Relatives searched for explanations. At first, they hoped. Then they worried. Then they feared. The emotional cruelty of uncertainty can be devastating. A confirmed death is tragic. An unexplained disappearance creates endless possibilities. Maybe they left voluntarily. Maybe they are alive somewhere. Maybe tomorrow will bring answers. Maybe next week. Maybe next month. The mind continues searching for hope long after logic suggests otherwise. Many families connected to Holmes experienced exactly that nightmare. They were denied closure. Denied certainty. Denied the opportunity to grieve fully. The disappearances became emotional prisons. And while others suffered confusion and heartbreak, Holmes continued moving forward. Business schemes expanded. Fraudulent ventures multiplied. New opportunities appeared. The mask remained firmly in place. No public scandal exposed him. No dramatic arrest interrupted his life. Not yet. But pressure was building beneath the surface. The web of deception had become enormous. Too many lies. Too many identities. Too many secrets. Sooner or later, something would break. The remarkable thing about the Holmes case is that the collapse did not begin because authorities discovered the full truth about the murder castle. It began elsewhere. With greed. With betrayal. with a business arrangement that transformed into murder. A decision Holmes believed he could control. A decision that would ultimately become the beginning of his downfall. As 1893 faded into 1894, the World's Fair closed its gates. The crowds dispersed. Visitors returned home carrying memories of technological wonders and dazzling architecture. Chicago settled back into ordinary life. But hidden beneath the city's surface, unresolved disappearances remained. Questions remained. Secrets remained. And H. Holmes remained free. For the moment. The people who vanished could no longer speak. The evidence remained scattered. The truth remained buried beneath layers of deception. Yet the events already set in motion were moving toward a collision. One that would expose Holmes to investigators. One that would reveal a trail of death stretching far beyond Chicago. One that would transform a respected businessman into one of the most infamous criminals in American history. The disappearances had been the warning. The real nightmare was only beginning. The downfall of H. Holmes did not begin with the discovery of hidden rooms. It did not begin with the rumors surrounding the building in Englewood. It did not begin with investigators uncovering evidence inside what newspapers would later call the murder castle. Instead, it began with greed. A greed so overwhelming that even a man, who had spent years deceiving others, eventually made a mistake. Like many criminals who operate successfully for long periods, Holmes began believing he was smarter than everyone around him. He had lied repeatedly and escaped consequences. He had manipulated business partners. He had reinvented himself whenever necessary. He had persuaded people to trust him. Every successful deception reinforced the illusion that he could control events indefinitely. But deception is fragile. The larger it becomes, the harder it is to maintain. By 1894, Holmes's life had become a tangled web of fraud schemes, false identities, unpaid debts, questionable business ventures, and disappearing associates. Each lie required another lie. Each secret required another secret. The structure was becoming unstable. Then he met a man named Benjamin Petezel. Unlike many individuals who entered Holmes's orbit, Benjamin was not a romantic interest or employee searching for opportunity. He was a partner. A fellow schemer. A man willing to participate in questionable ventures if there was money to be made. Benjamin Petezel was a carpenter by trade and a father struggling to support his family. He was not wealthy. Like many Americans of the era, he lived with financial uncertainty. That uncertainty made Holmes's proposals attractive. The two men became involved in insurance fraud schemes. At first, the plan seemed straightforward. They would exploit weaknesses in insurance systems and collect money through deception. Such scams were not unheard of during the 19th century. Records were imperfect. Identification procedures were limited. A determined fraudster could sometimes manipulate the system. The plan eventually evolved into something more ambitious. Benjamin would appear to die. An insurance claim would be filed. The payout would be collected. Then Benjamin would secretly reappear under another identity. Everyone involved would profit. At least that was the plan Benjamin believed he had agreed to. Holmes had other ideas. Sometime in September 1894, Benjamin Petezel entered a rented building in Philadelphia. He never walked out. When authorities later examined the scene, they found what appeared to be the body of a man killed in an accidental laboratory explosion. At first glance, the story seemed plausible. The corpse was badly burned. The circumstances appeared unfortunate, but believable. Yet beneath the surface, something was wrong. Very wrong. Investigators eventually concluded that Benjamin had not died accidentally. He had been murdered. Evidence suggested that Holmes had incapacitated him before setting the scene to resemble an accident. The details remain disturbing. This was not an impulsive act. It was calculated, planned, deliberate. Holmes had looked at a business partner and seen not a human being, but an opportunity. The insurance money mattered more than Benjamin's life. That decision would ultimately destroy him. But not immediately. For a brief period, Holmes appeared to have succeeded once again. The insurance claim moved forward. Money became available. Authorities remained unaware of the full truth. And Benjamin's family still believed he was alive. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this chapter involves what happened next. Benjamin left behind a wife and children. His wife, Carrie Petezel, trusted Holmes. That trust would become another weapon. Holmes convinced her that Benjamin remained alive, and that secrecy was necessary for the success of their plan. Carrie believed him. Why wouldn't she? Holmes had spent years perfecting his ability to sound convincing. He projected certainty, confidence, authority. To frightened families searching for reassurance, he offered exactly what they wanted to hear. And so Carrie followed his instructions. Meanwhile, Holmes began moving members of the Petezel family across multiple cities. The movements seemed confusing even at the time. Children were separated from their mother. Travel arrangements constantly changed. Instructions shifted. Explanations multiplied. Looking back, investigators would recognize these journeys as part of something far more sinister. Holmes was not protecting the family. He was isolating them. Among the children caught in this nightmare were Alice Petezel, Nellie Petezel, and Howard Petezel. They trusted the adults around them. Children always do. They followed instructions. Boarded trains. Checked into hotels. Moved from city to city. The world they experienced was likely confusing, but not necessarily frightening at first. After all, they believed they were traveling under the guidance of a trusted family friend. The tragedy lies in that trust. The same trust Holmes repeatedly exploited throughout his life. The same trust that allowed him to approach victims without resistance. The same trust that concealed danger until it was too late. As the weeks passed, Holmes's movements became increasingly erratic. He traveled extensively. Used aliases. Changed plans frequently. Every action seemed designed to avoid scrutiny. Yet scrutiny was finally beginning to arrive. The insurance company involved in the fraud became suspicious. Investigators started asking questions. One man in particular would prove crucial. His name was Frank G. Ear. G. Ear was a detective from Philadelphia. Unlike Holmes's previous victims, G. Ear possessed patience, determination, and professional experience. Most importantly, he refused to accept easy answers. At first, the investigation focused primarily on insurance fraud. Authorities believed they were pursuing a con artist. What they did not yet realize was that the trail would lead far beyond financial crimes. The deeper investigators looked, the darker the picture became. As evidence accumulated, inconsistencies emerged. Holmes's explanations no longer aligned. Timelines conflicted. Witness accounts raised new concerns. The illusion of control he had maintained for years began to crack. Then came the search. The search for the missing Petezel children. For families awaiting answers, every day mattered. Every unanswered question increased the fear. Every missing letter deepened the uncertainty. Detective G.E.A. followed the trail relentlessly. He traveled through multiple cities, examined records, interviewed witnesses, tracked movements that had occurred months earlier. The work was painstaking. There were no computers, no modern databases. Every lead required physical effort. Every clue demanded persistence. Piece by piece, the puzzle slowly formed. The trail eventually led to horrifying discoveries. In Toronto, investigators located a house connected to Holmes. Inside, they uncovered evidence indicating that Alice and Nellie Petezel had died there. The discovery devastated everyone involved. The girls had not disappeared voluntarily. They had not started new lives. They had not been reunited with their father. Their journey had ended in violence. The emotional impact was enormous. Even seasoned investigators struggled to process what they had found. These were children. Children who had trusted an adult. Children whose only mistake had been believing someone they were taught to trust. Soon afterward, another grim discovery followed. The remains of young Howard Petezel were found elsewhere, connected to Holmes's travels. The pattern became undeniable. Benjamin was dead. His children were dead. The insurance fraud investigation had transformed into something infinitely worse. Now authorities understood the scale of the threat. They were no longer dealing with an ordinary criminal. They were pursuing a killer. And suddenly, every aspect of Holmes's past demanded closer examination. Once suspicion intensified, detectives began revisiting locations associated with him. Questions that once seemed insignificant became critical. Former employees were interviewed. Business records were scrutinized. Witnesses remembered unusual incidents. Disappearances previously viewed as isolated events acquired new meaning. Attention gradually shifted toward the building in Chicago. The structure that had quietly stood in Englewood throughout years of rumors and speculation. Investigators entered looking for answers. What they found would ignite national fascination. Room after room was examined. Walls were inspected. Basements searched. Personal belongings catalogued. Evidence emerged suggesting that multiple crimes may have occurred there. Human remains. Bones. Hair. Burned clothing. Signs of destruction. Signs of concealment. Signs that terrible things had happened behind closed doors. The discoveries fueled public imagination immediately. Newspapers exploded with coverage. Reporters raced to uncover every possible detail. Some accounts were accurate. Others were exaggerated. Many blended fact and speculation together until separating them became nearly impossible. Readers across America followed every development. The story seemed unbelievable. A respected doctor. A mysterious building. Missing women. Dead children. Insurance fraud. Multiple identities. The elements felt almost fictional. Yet the suffering behind the headlines was real. For families connected to the victims, the discoveries brought a complicated mixture of emotions. Grief. Relief. Horror. At least some answers now existed. At least uncertainty was ending. Yet the truth proved devastating. The loved ones they had searched for were not coming home. As investigators continued their work, Holmes's carefully constructed world collapsed around him. The lies that had protected him for years were unraveling. The reputation he had cultivated was disintegrating. The trust he had weaponized was turning against him. Evidence accumulated. Witnesses emerged. Patterns became visible. The predator hidden behind the respectable facade was finally being exposed. But perhaps the most chilling realization was this. The investigation had begun almost accidentally. Not because authorities uncovered every disappearance. Not because they immediately solved the mystery of the murder castle. It began because Holmes became greedy. He murdered a partner for money. And that single act triggered a chain reaction that investigators could not ignore. Without Benjamin Petezel's death, many questions might never have been asked. Many disappearances might never have been connected. Many secrets might have remained buried forever. The discoveries inside Holmes's world shocked America. But they also revealed something else. For years, a dangerous man had operated in plain sight. People had seen him, spoken with him, trusted him. And now the evidence emerging from multiple cities suggested a horrifying possibility. The legend of H. Holmes was no longer being created. It was being uncovered. And the deeper investigators dug, the darker the truth appeared to become. By the time investigators began connecting the scattered pieces of H. Holmes's life, the case had already evolved into something far larger than anyone initially imagined. What had started as an insurance fraud investigation was becoming a journey through years of deception, missing persons, false identities, and unexplained deaths. Every answer seemed to generate 3 new questions. Every lead revealed another layer of complexity. And standing at the center of the growing storm was a man who had spent much of his adult life making sure nobody ever saw the complete picture. The challenge facing investigators was enormous. Modern detectives rely on fingerprints stored in databases, surveillance cameras, digital records, and instant communication. None of those tools existed in 1894. Every piece of information had to be gathered manually. Every witness interview required travel. Every document had to be located, examined, and compared by hand. The process was slow. Painfully slow. Yet despite those limitations, investigators gradually began uncovering a portrait of Holmes that differed dramatically from the respectable businessman known to his neighbors. The first obstacle was his remarkable talent for reinvention. Few people knew him by only one name. Throughout his life, Holmes adopted aliases whenever it suited him. He signed documents under different identities. He conducted business using false names. He rented properties without revealing his true background. He moved frequently. Changed stories frequently. Changed associates frequently. Tracking his movements became a nightmare. Detectives often arrived in one city only to discover that Holmes had already left weeks or months earlier. Witnesses remembered him differently. Some described him as polite. Others remembered him as charismatic. Some found him intelligent and engaging. A few recalled something unsettling beneath the surface. Yet even those uneasy impressions rarely translated into direct accusations. That was part of what made Holmes so difficult to understand. He did not fit the public image of a criminal. He was educated, well-spoken, professional. People expected danger to look dangerous. Holmes looked trustworthy. Investigators soon realized that many individuals who had crossed paths with him never suspected they were dealing with a predator. Former employees described a demanding employer. Business partners described a persuasive negotiator. Acquaintances described a charming conversationalist. Very few described a monster. Yet the evidence increasingly suggested exactly that. As detectives expanded their inquiry, they found themselves confronting a troubling reality. There were simply too many disappearances surrounding Holmes. One missing person could be coincidence. 2 might be unfortunate chance. But the growing number of vanished associates, romantic partners, employees, and business contacts became difficult to ignore. Patterns emerged. People entered Holmes's world. Then communication stopped. Families became concerned. Explanations appeared. Then the trail went cold. Again and again, the same sequence repeated. One of the most difficult aspects of the investigation involved determining which disappearances could actually be linked to Holmes. Newspapers often complicated matters. Sensational stories flooded the public. Rumors spread rapidly. Every missing person who had ever encountered Holmes suddenly became a potential victim in the eyes of reporters. Facts and speculation mixed together until they became nearly inseparable. Investigators needed evidence. Not rumors. Not headlines. Evidence. And evidence was frustratingly scarce. Many years had passed since some disappearances occurred. Potential crime scenes had been altered. Witness memories faded. Documents vanished. The passage of time protected Holmes almost as effectively as his lies. Meanwhile, the public fascination with the case exploded. Americans followed developments with growing obsession. Newspapers devoted entire pages to the investigation. Readers could not get enough. The story contained everything that captured public imagination. A mysterious doctor. A sinister building. Dead children. Missing women. Fraud. Murder. Secret identities. Every day seemed to bring another shocking revelation. Yet behind the sensational headlines, detectives continued performing painstaking work. They interviewed former tenants of Holmes's building. Some recalled unusual architectural features. Others remembered restricted areas. A few described odd instructions from Holmes himself. No single account provided definitive answers. But together they painted a picture of a man obsessed with control. Control over information. Control over people. Control over environments. The building in Englewood became a particular focus. After investigators searched the structure, reports describing its interior spread across the country. Journalists portrayed it as a nightmare maze designed specifically for murder. According to some accounts, hidden corridors twisted through the building. Secret doors connected rooms. Trapdoors allowed bodies to disappear. Gas lines enabled Holmes to kill victims without leaving obvious evidence. The descriptions grew more elaborate with each retelling. Whether every claim was accurate remains a matter of debate even today. Some modern historians believe many reports were exaggerated. Others argue that certain unusual features genuinely existed. Regardless of the precise details, investigators found enough disturbing evidence to confirm that the building was far from ordinary. The discoveries intensified pressure on law enforcement. People demanded answers. Families demanded answers. The nation demanded answers. How many victims were there? How long had Holmes been killing? What exactly happened inside the building? Detectives struggled to provide certainty. The deeper they looked, the murkier the case became. One problem haunted the investigation constantly. Holmes was a liar of extraordinary skill. Even after his arrest, he continued manipulating narratives. He altered details. Contradicted previous statements. Invented stories. Withheld information. Confessed to certain acts while denying others. At times, he seemed to enjoy the confusion he created. Investigators could never assume his statements were truthful. Every claim required verification. Every detail demanded scrutiny. This made the search for truth extraordinarily difficult. Imagine trying to assemble a puzzle while the person who created the puzzle continuously changes the shape of the pieces. That was the challenge detectives faced. Holmes understood attention. He understood public fascination. And he often appeared eager to remain at the center of both. Meanwhile, Detective Frank Gier continued pursuing the most emotionally devastating aspect of the case. The deaths of the Petezel children. Unlike many suspected victims linked to Holmes, the children's stories left little room for ambiguity. Their journeys could be reconstructed. Witnesses remembered them. Records documented their movements. The evidence painted a heartbreaking picture. 3 innocent children had been separated from their mother and placed in Holmes's care. They never returned. For Gier, these discoveries transformed the investigation from a professional obligation into something deeply personal. The case was no longer simply about fraud. It was about betrayal. The betrayal of trust. The betrayal of innocence. The betrayal of a family that had relied on Holmes's promises. As details emerged, public outrage intensified. Americans could perhaps understand greed. They could understand fraud. They could even understand murder, however horrifying. But the deaths of children struck a different emotional chord. The realization that Holmes had manipulated an entire family before destroying it horrified the nation. Newspapers amplified that horror relentlessly. Stories about the Petezel children appeared everywhere. Their photographs circulated. Their names became symbols of innocence lost. For many readers, the children transformed Holmes from a criminal into something far darker. A figure almost impossible to comprehend. Yet investigators remained cautious. Emotion could not replace evidence. Despite growing public certainty about Holmes's guilt in numerous disappearances, prosecutors still needed facts they could prove. That requirement created frustration. Many people believed Holmes had committed far more crimes than authorities could demonstrate conclusively. But belief alone was insufficient. Courtrooms demanded proof. Proof was often elusive. This gap between suspicion and certainty became one of the defining features of the case. Questions multiplied faster than answers. How many victims were real? How many stories were exaggerated? How many disappearances could genuinely be linked to Holmes? No one knew. Even today, historians continue debating those questions. Some estimate the number of victims was relatively small compared to the sensational claims made by 19th-century newspapers. Others believe the true total may never be known. The uncertainty itself became part of the legend. As investigators pushed forward, another uncomfortable realization emerged. Holmes's success depended not only on his own actions, but also on the world around him. The late 19th century provided ideal conditions for someone like him. Cities expanded rapidly. Record-keeping remained inconsistent. People moved frequently. Communication traveled slowly. A missing person could disappear into bureaucratic gaps. A false identity could survive longer than it could today. Holmes exploited those weaknesses relentlessly. He understood the system. Then he manipulated it. In many ways, the investigation became a race against the limitations of the era. Detectives were trying to reconstruct years of events using incomplete information. Every success required persistence. Every breakthrough required patience. Gradually, however, the overall picture sharpened. The respected doctor was not what he appeared to be. The successful businessman was not what he appeared to be. The helpful friend was not what he appeared to be. Behind every mask stood the same reality. Deception. Manipulation. Predation. The question was no longer whether Holmes had committed terrible crimes. The question was how many. And that question seemed impossible to answer fully. By late 1894 and into 1895, the investigation had become a national spectacle. Crowds discussed the case in restaurants and train stations. Newspaper vendors sold countless editions covering new developments. Reporters competed for exclusive details. Public fascination reached extraordinary levels. Yet amid all the attention, investigators remained focused on a more immediate goal: building a case that could survive in court. Rumors could capture headlines. Evidence secured convictions. And despite the mountain of suspicion surrounding Holmes, prosecutors understood a difficult truth. They might never prove every crime. They might never identify every victim. They might never uncover every secret hidden within the tangled maze of his life. But if they could prove enough, justice might still be possible. That realization marked a turning point. The investigation was no longer merely searching for answers. It was preparing for a confrontation. A confrontation that would place Holmes under the scrutiny of a courtroom. A confrontation where years of lies would collide with evidence. A confrontation where one of the most notorious criminal cases in American history would finally move toward judgment. The hunt for the truth was far from over. But for the first time, investigators could see the path ahead. And at the end of that path waited H. Holmes himself. For years, H. Holmes had lived behind carefully constructed masks. When one identity became inconvenient, he created another. When one lie collapsed, he built a larger one. When suspicion approached, he redirected attention elsewhere. The strategy had worked remarkably well. He had deceived business partners, manipulated romantic relationships, evaded creditors, exploited legal loopholes, and moved through multiple cities leaving confusion behind him. Again and again, he escaped consequences. Again and again, he convinced people to trust him. But every deception carries a hidden weakness. The more complicated the lie becomes, the more opportunities it creates for exposure. By the beginning of 1895, that weakness was finally beginning to consume him. The breakthrough investigators desperately needed did not arrive in a dramatic flash of inspiration. It emerged through persistence. Piece by piece. Interview by interview. Document by document. Detective Frank G. continued following trails that many others might have abandoned. The search for the Petezel children had already revealed horrifying truths. Their deaths transformed public perception of the case and intensified pressure on law enforcement. Yet investigators still needed to connect the scattered evidence into a coherent narrative. The challenge was enormous. Holmes had traveled extensively. He used aliases constantly. He left misleading information wherever he went. Every movement seemed designed to create confusion. To understand how investigators finally gained ground, it is important to understand the psychological mistake Holmes was making. For years, he had succeeded because he assumed other people would eventually give up. Most victims lacked resources. Most families lacked information. Most authorities lacked jurisdiction across multiple states. Holmes relied on fragmentation. He relied on disconnected systems. He relied on people failing to compare notes. What he failed to anticipate was the determination of investigators who refused to stop. Frank G. became particularly dangerous to Holmes because he possessed qualities the killer underestimated: patience, methodical thinking, persistence. G. was not searching for sensational headlines. He was searching for facts. That difference mattered. While newspapers focused on rumors of hidden chambers and mysterious disappearances, GEA focused on travel records, witness statements, rental agreements, train routes, small details. The kind of details that liars often overlook. Each discovery strengthened the case. Witnesses placed Holmes in specific locations. Documents connected him to properties where victims had stayed. Timelines became clearer. The fog surrounding his movements slowly began to lift. What investigators uncovered painted a devastating picture. After Benjamin Petezel's death, Holmes had orchestrated an elaborate series of journeys involving members of the victim's family. He moved children from city to city. He separated them from their mother. He provided constant reassurances while concealing horrifying intentions. The pattern revealed extraordinary manipulation. Every step demonstrated planning. Every decision demonstrated control. This was not chaos. This was calculation. For investigators, that realization represented a major breakthrough. They were no longer dealing with isolated incidents. They were uncovering a deliberate strategy. Holmes had manipulated entire families, while simultaneously managing fraud schemes and maintaining multiple identities. The complexity of his actions initially made him appear unpredictable. In reality, he followed consistent patterns. He identified vulnerabilities. He gained trust. He isolated victims. He removed obstacles. Then he lied about what happened afterward. Once detectives recognized that pattern, previously disconnected events suddenly appeared related. The significance of this shift cannot be overstated. Before the breakthrough, investigators were chasing fragments. After the breakthrough, they were assembling a picture. And the picture was becoming increasingly disturbing. Meanwhile, Holmes himself continued displaying remarkable confidence. Even while evidence accumulated, he appeared convinced he could outsmart everyone. That confidence likely stemmed from years of success. Few people had ever challenged him effectively. Few had ever exposed his schemes. He had spent so long manipulating others that he may have believed he could manipulate anyone. Including investigators. Including prosecutors. Including the public. That belief would become one of his greatest mistakes. As pressure intensified, Holmes began talking more freely. Sometimes he offered explanations. Sometimes he denied accusations. Sometimes he contradicted himself. The inconsistency created additional problems for him. Every statement provided investigators with opportunities to test his credibility. And increasingly, his credibility failed those tests. One lie exposed another. One contradiction revealed a larger contradiction. Gradually, the image of a respected businessman began collapsing. In its place emerged something far darker. At the same time, searches connected to Holmes's Chicago building continued generating public fascination. The structure became a symbol. Not merely of possible crimes, but of hidden evil. Reporters filled newspapers with dramatic descriptions. Readers imagined labyrinths of horror concealed within ordinary walls. Some accounts exaggerated the reality. Others may have contained elements of truth. Regardless, the building's reputation became inseparable from Holmes himself. Every new discovery fueled public outrage. Every headline intensified demands for justice. Yet the most important breakthrough remained rooted in evidence rather than legend. The deaths of Benjamin Petezel and his children provided prosecutors with something invaluable. A clear narrative. A provable narrative. Many disappearances associated with Holmes existed within uncertainty. Too much time had passed. Too little evidence remained. Witnesses could not always confirm crucial details. But the Petezel case was different. Investigators could trace movements, establish timelines, connect locations, demonstrate deception. The case possessed structure. That structure gave prosecutors confidence. They no longer needed to prove every suspected crime. They needed to prove enough. This strategic realization represented another major turning point. Public fascination focused on the possibility of dozens, or even hundreds of victims. Prosecutors focused on securing a conviction. Those objectives were not identical. A courtroom requires proof beyond speculation. Even if Holmes had committed numerous murders, proving them all would be nearly impossible. Proving one carefully documented case could achieve the same outcome. As authorities prepared their legal strategy, Holmes's network of lies continued unraveling. Former associates became witnesses. Business records gained significance. Financial documents exposed motives. Patterns of behavior emerged. Each new piece of information strengthened the prosecution's position. Meanwhile, public interest reached extraordinary levels. People across America followed developments obsessively. Conversations about Holmes appeared everywhere. Restaurants, train stations, hotels, factory floors, church gatherings. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Everyone wanted answers. The case combined fear and fascination in equal measure. Part of that fascination came from a troubling realization. Holmes did not resemble popular images of evil. He was not physically imposing. He did not appear monstrous. He looked ordinary, respectable, educated. The contrast disturbed people. Americans wanted villains to be recognizable. Holmes challenged that assumption. He demonstrated how easily appearances could deceive. As investigators learned more about his life, another pattern became clear. Control mattered deeply to him. Control over relationships. Control over information. Control over money. Control over narratives. Even after his arrest, he attempted to influence how others perceived events. He wanted to shape the story, to direct attention, to remain the central figure. Yet with every passing week, control slipped further from his grasp. The evidence no longer belonged to him. The investigation no longer belonged to him. The story no longer belonged to him. Detectives and prosecutors were taking ownership of the narrative. Facts were replacing excuses. Documents were replacing claims. Reality was replacing performance. For years, Holmes had thrived because nobody could see the complete picture. Now the picture was coming into focus. And what emerged horrified the nation. The breakthrough was not a single discovery hidden inside a mysterious room. It was the gradual collapse of a carefully constructed illusion. An illusion built over years. An illusion maintained through charm, intelligence, and deception. An illusion finally defeated by persistence. Perhaps that is what makes this chapter so significant. Many criminal investigations celebrate dramatic moments. A surprise confession. A hidden piece of evidence. A sudden revelation. The Holmes case unfolded differently. The breakthrough came through relentless determination. Investigators refused to abandon unanswered questions. They refused to accept convenient explanations. They refused to stop searching. Because they continued searching, the truth slowly emerged. The dead children could no longer speak. The missing women could no longer explain what happened. The victims depended on others to uncover the reality hidden behind Holmes's lies. And eventually, that reality became impossible to ignore. By the middle of 1895, authorities understood they possessed something powerful. Not merely suspicions. Not merely rumors. A case. A case supported by evidence. A case capable of surviving courtroom scrutiny. A case that could finally place Holmes where investigators believed he belonged. Before long, attention would shift from detective work to legal battle. Witnesses would testify. Lawyers would argue. Evidence would be presented. The man who had spent years manipulating others would face a system designed to expose deception. The coming confrontation would determine whether justice could be achieved. It would test the strength of the evidence. It would test the skill of prosecutors. And it would test whether one of America's most notorious criminals could continue hiding behind the masks he had worn for so long. The breakthrough had arrived. The hunt was ending. The reckoning was approaching. And for the first time in years, H. Holmes was running out of places to hide. The courtroom was crowded long before the proceedings began. Reporters filled benches with notebooks ready. Curious citizens gathered wherever space remained. Lawyers organized documents. Officials moved through the room with practiced efficiency. Every person present understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. By the autumn of 1895, H. Holmes was no longer merely a suspect. He had become one of the most infamous men in America. Newspapers had transformed him into a national sensation. Stories about the mysterious doctor appeared almost daily. Rumors spread faster than facts. Speculation filled conversations from Chicago to New York. Some believed Holmes had murdered dozens. Others believed the number reached into the hundreds. No one seemed entirely certain where reality ended and legend began. But inside the courtroom, legends did not matter. Evidence did. That distinction would define everything that followed. For all the public fascination surrounding the murder castle, secret rooms, and vanished women, prosecutors chose a different path. They focused on a crime they believed they could prove beyond reasonable doubt. The murder of Benjamin Petezel. It was a practical decision. Investigators suspected Holmes had committed numerous crimes. However, suspicion alone could not secure a conviction. The Petezel case offered something stronger. Documents. Witnesses. Timelines. Physical evidence. A clear sequence of events. The prosecution intended to build its case carefully and methodically. Meanwhile, Holmes entered the courtroom carrying the same confidence that had defined much of his adult life. Photographs from the era show a man who appeared remarkably ordinary. His mustache was neatly groomed. His clothing was respectable. His expression often seemed calm. Nothing about his appearance matched the monstrous image developing in newspaper headlines. That contrast fascinated the public. How could someone accused of such terrible crimes look so normal? The question lingered throughout the trial. As proceedings began, prosecutors laid out their argument. Benjamin Petezel had not died in an accident. He had not been the victim of unfortunate circumstances. He had been murdered. And the man responsible sat only a few feet away. The evidence pointed toward a calculated scheme. Holmes and Petezel had planned an insurance fraud operation. The original concept involved deception. A fake death. An insurance payout. Financial gain. Instead, Holmes altered the plan. Rather than staging a death, he created a real one. The prosecution argued that greed motivated the decision. Holmes wanted the insurance money for himself. Benjamin became an obstacle. And Holmes removed obstacles. Witnesses began taking the stand. One after another, they helped reconstruct the events leading to Petezel's death. Jurors listened carefully. Each testimony added another piece to the puzzle. Travel records established movements. Business records revealed financial motivations. Statements exposed inconsistencies in Holmes's explanations. The picture gradually sharpened. Throughout the trial, Holmes continued displaying the composure that had served him for years. Observers frequently commented on his calm demeanor. He rarely appeared shaken. Rarely appeared emotional. Rarely appeared frightened. Some interpreted the behavior as confidence. Others interpreted it as something more unsettling. A man detached from the suffering around him. A man who viewed the proceedings as another problem to solve. Yet confidence could not erase evidence. And evidence continued accumulating. One of the most powerful aspects of the prosecution's case involved demonstrating Holmes's pattern of deception. The murder itself mattered enormously. But so did everything surrounding it. The lies told afterward. The manipulation of family members. The movement of the Petezel children. The false promises. The shifting stories. Jurors were not evaluating a single isolated incident. They were evaluating a broader pattern of behavior. A pattern revealing deliberate dishonesty at nearly every stage. Outside the courtroom, public interest reached astonishing levels. Newspaper readers devoured every detail. Reporters competed aggressively for exclusive information. Headlines described testimony, analyzed strategy, and speculated about outcomes. The trial became one of the most closely followed criminal proceedings of its era. People wanted answers. How many victims were there? What really happened inside the Chicago building? How much of the horrifying legend was true? The courtroom could not answer every question. Its purpose was narrower. To determine guilt regarding a specific crime. Still, the larger shadow of Holmes's reputation hung over every proceeding. Even when testimony focused on Benjamin Petezel, everyone understood that other tragedies lingered in the background. Missing women. Dead children. Unexplained disappearances. Those stories remained present in the public imagination. They reinforced the sense that Holmes represented something larger than a single murder case. He represented a broader nightmare. A nightmare involving trust betrayed on an extraordinary scale. As the trial progressed, prosecutors emphasized Holmes's financial motives repeatedly. Money appeared throughout the story. Insurance payouts. Fraudulent schemes. Business transactions. Property arrangements. Again and again, investigators found evidence suggesting Holmes viewed people as assets rather than human beings. If someone possessed value, he exploited it. If someone became inconvenient, he discarded them. The pattern was chilling. Particularly because it appeared so calculated. There was little evidence of rage. Little evidence of impulsive violence. Instead, the prosecution presented a portrait of a man capable of planning harmful acts with remarkable patience. That image disturbed jurors. It disturbed the public. And it damaged the defense's ability to create reasonable doubt. Holmes's attorneys faced an extremely difficult challenge. The evidence was substantial. Public opinion was overwhelmingly hostile. Media coverage intensified pressure constantly. Every day brought new stories. Every day reinforced Holmes's reputation as a dangerous criminal. Defending him required confronting not only the prosecution's evidence, but also the enormous weight of public perception. Yet despite those obstacles, the legal process continued. Witnesses testified. Arguments were presented. Evidence was examined. The courtroom became the place where rumor and reality collided. Some sensational claims never appeared because they lacked sufficient proof. Others survived scrutiny and became part of the official record. This distinction remains important even today. The Holmes case exists partly within history and partly within mythology. The trial focused on history, facts, documents, testimony. The mythology existed outside the courtroom. Newspapers often blurred the line between the two. Jurors were instructed not to. Meanwhile, Holmes himself remained a subject of fascination. Observers studied his reactions constantly. Did he appear nervous, regretful, angry, remorseful? Accounts varied. Some described him as detached. Others described him as confident. A few suggested he remained convinced he could somehow escape conviction. Whatever emotions he experienced internally, the evidence against him continued strengthening. Then came the moment everyone anticipated. Closing arguments. Prosecutors summarized months of investigation and testimony. They argued that the case revealed deliberate murder motivated by greed. They reminded jurors of the evidence, the inconsistencies, the lies, the financial incentives, the carefully constructed deception. The defense attempted to challenge those conclusions. They questioned interpretations, highlighted uncertainties, raised alternative possibilities. But by this stage, the overall direction of the case appeared increasingly clear. The jury withdrew to deliberate. Across the nation, people waited. Newspapers prepared extra editions. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Families connected to the case anxiously anticipated the decision. For some, the verdict represented more than a legal outcome. It represented acknowledgement, recognition of suffering, recognition of loss, recognition that terrible crimes had occurred. When the jury returned, the atmosphere inside the courtroom changed immediately. Every person present understood the significance of the moment. The verdict was read. Guilty. H. Holmes was convicted of the murder of Benjamin Petezel. The decision marked a turning point. Years of deception had finally reached a consequence. The man who spent much of his life manipulating others could no longer control the outcome. The justice system had reached its conclusion. Yet one major question remained. Punishment. The sentencing phase attracted enormous attention. Given the nature of the crime and the evidence presented, many observers expected the harshest penalty available. That expectation proved correct. Holmes was sentenced to death. The sentence carried profound symbolic weight. For supporters of the prosecution, it represented justice. For grieving families, it offered a measure of closure. Not complete closure. Nothing could restore lost lives. Nothing could return children to their parents. Nothing could erase years of uncertainty and pain. But the sentence confirmed that society recognized the severity of the crimes. Holmes responded to the verdict in ways that continued fueling public fascination. He granted interviews, made statements, offered varying accounts of events. At times he appeared eager to remain in the spotlight. Even after conviction, he seemed unable to relinquish attention. Publishers paid for stories. Journalists sought exclusive comments. The spectacle continued. In some ways, the trial ended the legal battle while simultaneously expanding the legend. People remained captivated by unanswered questions. How many victims truly existed? What happened inside the building in Chicago? How much had newspapers exaggerated? How much remained undiscovered? Those debates would continue for generations. Yet within the courtroom itself, the central issue had been resolved. The evidence persuaded the jury. The verdict established responsibility. The sentence established punishment. Justice, at least in the eyes of the law, had been delivered. As Holmes awaited execution, America reflected on a case unlike any it had encountered before. A doctor. A businessman. A fraudster. A murderer. A man whose ordinary appearance concealed extraordinary deception. The courtroom battle was over. The verdict had been delivered. And now the final chapter of Holmes's life was approaching rapidly. The law had spoken. The sentence was set. Only the execution remained.